Welcome to the Special Districts, an educational presentation by the League of Women Voters, recorded on August 10th. Here is our League President, Christina Matthey.
Special districts are important in Colorado because there are 2,930 Title 32 special districts in Colorado. Only Texas, Florida, Illinois, and California have more special districts, and those states have significantly larger populations and land masses than Colorado does. In Colorado, special districts consume a significant amount of tax dollars. The public's knowledge regarding the purpose of special districts and the effect of special districts is very limited. The education of the public and the efficiency of government bodies are very much issues of the League of Women Voters. We will have three presenters today. I will be presenting the League positions, an overview of special districts, tell some stories, and discuss recently passed legislation and provide some ideas on where we need to go regarding special districts. Fair Russick will be presenting the history of special districts, demonstrating certain problem areas, and John Henderson will be identifying the problems we are currently aware of with special districts. Fair is a League member and is also a member of Citizens for Metro District Reform. Fair has resided in the Dancing Willows Metro District since 2010. John is also a League member and is an attorney with a strong interest in land use and development. John has practiced law in various parts of the country, so it brings a broad perspective to our work. The mission of the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. The League was formed in 1920 with the understanding that in order to vote, a citizen must be informed. Uninformed citizens lead to indifference. Uninformed citizens do not know how to screen information and resources for facts. The League is interested in supplying resources and facts so that citizens can understand situations, form an opinion, actively participate in government, and engage in informed voting. The League of Women Voters is a political but nonpartisan organization where candidates are concerned. The League also has a long history of studying issues and developing a position. After we have developed a position on an issue, we are not nonpartisan. We use our positions to lobby for changes in government. If League has not developed a position on a topic, we cannot lobby on that issue. League has been developing positions for over 100 years. Links to our positions can be found at LWVJeffco.org under our Where We Stand tab. The League has several positions that are particularly applicable today. This slide represents the League's position regarding economical and efficient government. The League has already studied special districts. This is our position regarding special districts. We are not here today to tell you that all special districts are bad. They are not. Special districts have a purpose. You may, however, decide by the end of this meeting that without safeguards, special districts lend themselves to abuses. As you hear the presentation, ask yourself the following questions. What are special districts? How do special districts affect my community? How do special districts affect my taxes? What obligations are we incurring with special districts that will require payment by future generations? What is the oversight for special districts? How can I participate in my special district and my special district election? The Jefferson County League became interested in special districts when one of our members persistently asked, what are all of these various tax authorities on my tax bill? Our examination indicated that there were problems in the area of creation and management of special districts and the election process itself. These are very much League issues. This presentation includes many examples from Jefferson and Larimer counties, but the underlying facts apply to all special districts across the state. It has become very fashionable to deplore government and taxes. Information on local governments and the elections of local governments are something that many people fail to pay attention to. People do not understand that local governments provide many of the essentials that affect their daily lives. This ignorance as to what government entity provides which services and where our tax dollars go contributes to people's dissatisfaction with government. Instead of deploring government, we should be asking ourselves, what services do we want government to provide, and how are we willing to pay for those services? In 2022, Jefferson County ran a survey on how residents thought county money should be spent. This graph shows the results of that survey. Many people are aware that they make a payment to the county treasurer for property taxes, but they are unaware that in Jefferson County, the county only keeps 24 cents of every dollar collected. We are here today to discuss where 21 cents of every dollar paid to the treasurer goes. So how do you find out about special districts? How do you find out whether your home is in a special district and how much of your taxes goes to a special district? First, you need your tax bill. Your tax bill will show the special districts. If your mortgage company pays your taxes on your behalf, you may need to access the county treasurer site. As we were doing our research on special districts, we discovered that many homeowners with mortgages do not get their property tax bill. Instead, the county sends the homeowner a postcard that informs them that the mortgage company has been provided with the property tax bill. This citizen must then go to the county assessor or treasurer's website to examine the detail of the property tax bill. This tactic does not encourage citizen awareness. Renters, of course, do not see a property tax bill and must go to the county website to find out what the property taxes are on the home they live in. These slides are from various counties, and they show the top 10 taxing jurisdictions from each of these counties. If the school district was not in the top 10, I added it at the bottom, and that shows in green. If the school district is in the top 10, it's highlighted in yellow. Also, I've highlighted in yellow non-metro special districts. So this is Adams and Arapahoe County. We have Broomfield and Boulder here. El Paso and Jefferson, and Weld and Larimer, and Summit and Garfield. As you can see from these slides, something called metropolitan districts seems to have the highest tax rates. So what is a special district? Special districts are created under Title 32 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. The statutes governing special districts were enacted by the legislature so that services the people believed to be essential could be provided. If an unincorporated part of a county wanted to have a fire department, the people had the option to create a special district that would provide fire services. The statutes regarding special districts were first codified in 1948 and have been amended since that time. This slide shows some of the services that a metro district may provide and the number of special districts in each type. We have 11 in an ambulance district, both in May and in August. However, you notice there is a change in the number of metro districts between May and August. Special districts are by their very nature designed to be small government bodies. In order for such districts to function correctly, citizen involvement is essential. However, if citizen involvement is limited, what happens to these small government bodies? This slide shows the total number of governments reporting to the Department of Local Affairs, DOLA for short, on both August 2nd and May 16th. The legislature has assigned oversight of special districts to the appointing authority, a city or county, DOLA, and the state auditor's office. Special districts are required to file reports with the approving district and DOLA. In Jefferson County, we asked a county commissioner, what happens to these reports? At that time, we were told the reports are filed in a file drawer somewhere. The state auditor collects the annual financial report statements filed by the special districts. These financial statements are supposed to be audited by an outside accounting firm, but the state auditor frequently waives the requirement. The scope of an outside auditor is to review the financial statements for their correctness regarding payments. It is not the job of an outside auditor to review the special district for any of the situations we may bring up today. A core principle of League is that we fight for the citizens' right to vote. May 2nd was election day for special districts. Did you vote? Were you notified about the special district election? Do you know how to cast your vote? Do you know where to deliver your ballot? Where did you find out about your candidates? Did you know if your special district canceled its election? Do you know the results of the elections? Colorado prides itself on setting the gold standard for general elections. There is strong evidence that the special district elections do not meet the gold standard. The statutes governing special district elections fall under Colorado Revised Statute Title I, Section 13.5. DOLA is the agency primarily responsible for the special district elections. In general, voter turnout for non-presidential elections is poor. Voter turnout for non-November elections is even worse. Foothills Fire District for the May 2nd election mailed 3,338 ballots. 673 ballots were cast. Another 96 were returned as undeliverable. West Metro Fire District in Jefferson County has about 300,000 residents in it. In the 2022 election, some 1,576 votes were cast. The 2023 election was canceled because there were only enough candidates to fill the existing vacancies. 2023 was the first year that the special district elections were held in the spring of the odd year. Legislators felt that by moving the special district elections to the spring of the odd years, the county clerks would be relieved of some of the burden of the elections and could handle special district elections. There was a serious communication gap between the legislators and the county clerks. This change did not help the county clerks at all. As a result, not a single county clerk ran the election for special districts this spring. We know that combined elections are very expensive to run. Jefferson County has 11 cities in it and a school board. There will be elections in these districts this fall. Jefferson County estimates that the combined election cost this November will cost around $1 million. Since the county clerks did not run the May 2nd election, each special district had to run its own election. Each special district designates a person to be the contact person for the election. Typically, this is an employee of a law firm. Through its webpage, the Jefferson County Clerk kept a list of special districts who had canceled their elections for this spring and those that were going to have an election. The county report showed that 116 districts canceled their elections. 9 districts reported to the county that they were going to have an election. Unfortunately, there are approximately 279 special districts in Jefferson County. Every single one of them should have filed a report of some kind. Where's the information? In order to have voter turnout, you must have an election for a voter to turn out for. So who actually can vote in a special district election? Any registered voter living in a district or owning property in a district, or who has a contract to buy property in a district, or whose spouse owns property in a district, may vote in a special district election. We know that there are circumstances where developers for metro districts have told residents that they are not eligible to vote to run for a metro district. This is incorrect. The minute you sign an agreement to purchase property in a special district, you are eligible to run for office in that district. So how do you vote in a special district election? In a special district election, the voter should never assume that a ballot will be automatically mailed to him. Each special district determines whether the election is mail-in or in person, or whether the ballots are mailed to all residents or only to those residents who request a ballot. In 2022, I returned my ballots to a law firm in the Denver Tech Center. The ballot box was a soft-sided Samsonite suitcase with a slit cut in the top. Recent legislation requires that metro districts notify residents, taxpayers about special district elections. Other types of special districts were able to persuade the legislators that they could not afford to engage in the personal contact that was required for metro districts. So more primitive methods of notifying voters of elections were permitted for these. Fair will have some excellent examples of what constitutes notification. We had one member call her local water district asking for information on the special district election and the candidates. That member was told that the district did not have the resources to change their website to report that kind of information. Special districts are supposed to report election cancellations and results both to the county clerk and DOLA. We had a different member call another water board regarding that district's election. The member was told that the election was canceled. She asked why it had not been reported on their website or to the county or to DOLA. She was told by the district representative that they were not required to report an election cancellation until May 2nd, election day. That is incorrect. The special district is required to notify DOLA by February 28th of a canceled election. If you are curious about your district, I recommend checking the DOLA website for information. We have had several reports that candidates were approached by officials from special districts asking that the candidate withdraw. If there are not multiple candidates for an election, there is no election, and elections are very expensive to run. So if we can control not having an election. Did you see the results of your special district election? When did you find out the results? How did you find out about the results? Who was accountable for reporting the results? In a general election, we find out the results from the news and on the county clerk website or the Secretary of State's website. In the case of special districts, you have to look diligently for the results of a special district election. For special district elections, if you disagree with the election results, you have 10 days from the date the ballots were recounted to appeal to the district court. General elections are first appealed to the Secretary of State. Results from the May 2nd election were reported to DOLA by June 1st. We don't know whether your date passed you by or not if you wanted to protest. Who's counting the ballots and who's observing the ballots being counted? If the ballots are being delivered to a law firm, where are they being counted? It is very clear that special district elections do not meet the gold standard that the Secretary has set for our elections. In general, turnout for the special district elections is abysmal. The issues listed above are all tactics that would discourage any citizen from exercising their right to vote. Since League is interested in preserving the people's right to vote at all levels of government, we would be very interested in what is happening in the special districts.
John Henderson, thank you for the introduction, Christina. A Colorado attorney, master's in public administration, been studying, researching, advocating, and advising on Metro District and Metro District abuse for much of the past 6 years. What I'm going to do this evening or this afternoon is provide a sample of Metro District abuses. There are 3, and what I'm going to do isn't not going to simply talk to you about them based upon my experience. They'll certainly be part of that. But what I really want to do more than anything else is show you the documents, because the documents tell the story. And the story is in the developers or their representatives' own words. They are admitting to us the abuses that I'm going to describe, and you're going to see those admissions in their own words, in their own documents. So we talk about metro districts, and what we're talking about in particular are districts that are created in order to fund the construction of a new neighborhood subdivision. We're not talking about fire districts right now. We're not talking about library districts, water and sanitation districts. We're talking about those 2,900 districts, the vast majority, which are being used to build subdivisions. And here's your developer. He buys the land, he puts the pipes in the ground, sells the developed lot to the home builder, who puts a house on the lot that you buy. Now, in most other parts of the country, and certainly in Colorado before the mid 80s and more recently since early 2000s, when you bought a house, you figured you paid for the land, you figured you paid for the pipes in the ground, and you paid for the house on top of the ground. And you paid for those in cash, in part in cash, and more likely than not with a mortgage. In Colorado metro districts, you don't do that anymore. You pay a la carte. You pay for the house, you pay for the land, but unfortunately, all too often, you get a bill for an increase in taxes, sometimes as high as $2,000 or $3,000 more than you paid last year. And you learn that you didn't pay for the pipes in the ground when you bought the house. The developer is collecting his repayment for the pipes in the ground through the metro districts, sometimes financed as long as 50 years later, and in many cases, indefinitely, because of the refunding that takes place and the sheer size of the debt. So let's talk about the first abuse. The first abuse that I want to discuss is right off the bat. There is a requirement in the statute. I've cited it here, paragraph 2. The county or city considering the application for a new metro district shall disapprove. Shall disapprove. And shall in the legal world is a magical word. Judges love it because there's no discretion. Shall means shall. Unfortunately, the applicants and the city and the counties receiving these gloss over this requirement and simply proceed as if it was a purely discretionary move. The two things that they have to prove, that they shall prove, and the monkey is on the developer's back to prove this. They have the burden of proof. They have to prove there is a need for this district and that the district will be financially sustainable, reasonably financially sustainable. So the first document is the statute. The second document is the service plan. It's in the service plan where the developer meets that requirement and proves there is a need. And we're going to see what that looks like here in just a moment. Paraphrasing it, what they say in the service plan, there's a need because there isn't a district there now. Now think about that. If that were really a legitimate justification for building metro districts, the extension of that is that Colorado should be nothing but metro districts. There should be a metro district covering every square inch of Colorado. No need for cities or counties. We'll just have metro districts. Of course, that's absurd. Second, the developer never proves that they can't get paid back for the cost of the infrastructure in the traditional way, through the cost of the developed lot. Some cities, Erie I was working with, are beginning to require that the developer provide sufficient justification for the metro district by showing they can't pay for and make enough profit without the additional financing. When I've raised this question in conversations like this or debates like this with the development industry, I have yet in 6 years to get an answer to the question, what happened to the money I paid you when I bought the house? In our community, we did the math and it was not hard to do. We discovered we paid about $4 million collectively for the cost of the land. We paid about $37 million collectively for the cost of the pipes in the ground. But we paid anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 per lot to the developer for the developed lot. And what we found was that even before Metro District financing, we had paid the developer over $75 million in profit on an investment of $41 million. And that was before they demanded another $60 million in payments through the Metro District financing. What happened to the money you paid, I paid for the developed lot? The developers do not want to answer that question. They don't even want to talk about it in these kinds of conversations or presentations. Many districts are in financial trouble, requiring high fees and more debt to pay bills. In many cases, the financial plan presented in the service plan at the time the district is created is very steep in estimates for how much money is going to come in, very shallow on how much money is going to have to go out. And the reality is oftentimes the reverse. Just for example, one of the districts I've been working with, the manager was boasting to the new citizen board that they shouldn't be so concerned about the brand new increase of $1,800 a year in extra fees to simply pay for lawn mowing and other basic maintenance, because in every district he manages, over 20, they've raised the fees routinely because there simply isn't enough money through the property taxes that they're already paying, oftentimes 50 to 60 mils or more, to pay for the cost of simply mowing the lawns. Here is the document, service plan, the developer's explanation for the need for the district. Since there are no government entities currently providing these services, then we need a district. Again, there is no explanation or justification for why you can't provide these services the way you did them before metro districts, the way they're done in many other parts of the country, simply by financing it through the cost of the home. And the kicker there is the last phrase, provided in the most economic manner possible. We won't have time to get into the weeds here, but suffice it to say that metro district financing is one of the most expensive ways to pay for infrastructure. There are at least two loans with interest on both loans. You're paying interest on interest, and it's simply a more expensive proposition. Here is an example illustrating how unsustainable metro districts are in many communities. I mentioned to you the community I was working with where they kept raising the fees to pay the basic expenses. Here's the budget for a similar district. And consider in this district, there are only 24 houses. A metro district for 24 houses. That's 24 homes that are being asked to serve on boards, run a metro district, pay for a metro district. And just to put a point on it, you see the property taxes generated by this district are a little over $8,000. Scrolling down, the expenditures for the basic costs of running a district, the accounting, the audit, the legal, engineering, so forth, $42,000. Income $8,000, expenses $42,000. How do you make up the difference? Well, there you go. At the top section, developer advances. The developer is subsidizing the cost of this district that really has no business being created in the first place. And of course, you know what I'm going to say next. That advance doesn't come free. That advance is a loan, and you're going to pay interest on that loan. Same district, they issued debt. The developer issued debt. And look at this. The developer advances $483,000, issues a bond, he says, exactly the same amount, puts the money in his pocket, adds $30,000 of his advance, which is yet another loan, to simply pay for the costs of the attorneys and the accountants to issue this bond, which in this case, he actually holds. It's not sold on the market. And it's basically simply a piece of paper that says, you owe me $483,000. And when asked, you're going to get very little information as to how that money was spent. And now the residents who have tax revenue of $8,000 are going to be paying, in this case, a $1.6 million bond. Second abuse, eliminating residents' right to vote on debt through a Tabor election. Think about it. Prairie dogs, rattlesnakes, dirt. Nothing's there. But the developer, and in this case, 8 members of his family or organization, sit around the table, in my mind, a picture of them eating pizza. They kick back and they vote, and they have a Tabor election. These folks who are voting will never live there. They will never pay any taxes. And not only that, but the money that's being generated by those taxes is being paid to them. And they're sitting around and they're going to vote and have a Tabor election to eliminate the right of future residents to ever do what they are doing. And that is vote on how much taxes and bond debt is going to be imposed on those very residents. This vote, by the way, is never disclosed to the residents. When you buy your house, did anybody tell you that a small group of developers, family, and employees voted to eliminate your right to vote on how much money they were going to tax you to pay them? No, they never told you that. Here's what that ballot issue looks like. And there are other things they do, but I'm focusing on the red underline. And yeah, there's the vote. It was unanimous, 8-0. And the language there at the bottom, where I've highlighted in red, is the legal language that says, we are eliminating your right, future residents, and we're giving that right to issue bond debt and impose taxes to a board, which is going to be developer controlled as long as they can. And whenever the developers vote, it's just like in the line, 2 lines from the bottom, just like a voter approved revenue change, referencing the provision in the Constitution, which is Tabor. And even more fun, and another document that provides an admission by the developer as to what they're doing. This is the bond prospectus, usually about 150 pages, and they're serving on a silver platter all the information you could ever want to know about your metro district. Finances, organization, governance, who the people are. They serve it on a silver platter to the bond investors as they're selling their bonds, and could very easily share it with you when you buy your house, could very easily share a half-page disclosure form with some of this information, but they don't. You have to dig for it, you have to find it. But here's what it says. It says, elections are required in the state of Colorado under Tabor before any debt can be imposed. Second line from the bottom, underline it. The district must have voter approval in advance for the creation of any multiple fiscal year debt. And in our community, there at the bottom, in 2006, the qualified electors, the voters for that district, voted to put themselves in debt, to authorize debt up to, count the zeros at the bottom, $4.9 billion. I assure you that when I bought my house, nobody told me that there had been an election. Nobody told me I had $4.9 billion in authorized debt hanging over my head. And nowhere in this document, ladies and gentlemen, does the developer or his attorneys or his accountants, his bond counsel tell the prospective members of the public who are buying this bond that the people who voted at that 2006 election were 8 members of the developer's business or family who have an absolute conflict of interest with the people upon whom they're imposing that debt. The third abuse, unenforced, what I call unenforceable agreements. Agreements where the developer, which the developer enters into with himself to impose debt obligations on residents and unilaterally, in other agreements, gives himself more votes on the governing board than the residents. Again, where he has an absolute conflict of interest. In many of these agreements, the developer has created a district with many districts. In other words, in our community, for example, in Solterra, we had 3 districts. One district was the master district, which would always be developer controlled because in many cases it was only 10 square feet. It moved around. It was the trailer. There was wherever the trailer was where their district was. The other 2 districts, which were all the rest of the territory, were the resident districts. And under an agreement that the developer entered into him with himself, the resident districts would pay all of their tax revenue to the 10 square foot master district, and the master district would make all the decisions about how that money was spent. The master district would also decide how much in taxes and in debt would be issued and imposed on the residents in the other districts. I've said this before, you've heard it before for some folks, but the economic model we're talking about is what we used to, or what we know as feudalism, right? You're paying all of your money, all of your taxes to the king, and the king unilaterally decides how to spend them. You don't have a vote. Here's an example of what a master servant district looks like, or configuration looks like. You see those tiny little skinny slivers at the top? Those are the developers districts. And there's 5 members sitting on that board, all of whom are related to or employed by the developer. And those people governing that little sliver of land where no one will ever live because it's open space or retention ponds, they make decisions on how all of the money will be spent and how the taxes will be issued for the rest of the district, which is where the people actually live. Let's look at those agreements. Here was our agreement. It, in essence, said the resident districts will pay all their money to the developer district. And this, there's signature for the 2 resident districts and signature for the developer district. Of course, as you can see, you don't have to be a handwriting expert to see it's the same person. They don't even have a different person sign. That same person is signing for the developer district, and the residents. Here's another one. District 1, signing the agreement, developer signing the agreement, the signatures are the same person. Developer entering into an agreement with himself. Here's another one. Signatures for each of the sub-districts in this particular community. Who is this person? Well, you see at the very end, he's the developer. And in this particular agreement, look at what they did. They created an overarching governing board, and the management district shall have the right to appoint 5 people. The management district, of course, is the developer district. And the financing districts only get 1. A clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, one person, one vote, a complete corruption of the section, I believe it's Title 24, that authorizes regional organizations, and there's no provision, no authority for doing that under Title 32. And just to put a point on it, in every single audit I have seen, and I have seen, I don't know, more than 100, I've lost count. Every single audit for every single metro district, the auditor is obliged to disclose related parties. And in each and every one where the governing board is still developer or partially developer, they have to disclose that the developer has a conflict of interest with the residents. And the residents, unfortunately, have to dig and find that audit and read the fine print on page whatever it is of the audit in order to find out the developer has a conflict of interest with the residents, and the developer is calling all the shots. Just a sample. Thank you particularly to the legislators and their staff. If Tammy's story was here, I was hoping I get a chance to thank her for all of her good work on behalf of the residents. Where there's a will, we can cure these abuses, and we look forward to more conversation and discussion about how to do that. Thanks so much, all.
I'm Fair Russick. I'm a native Coloradan, a graduate of CU, and I've resided in Colorado for my whole life. I joined the League of Women Voters a couple of years ago. I'm going to cover the history of and formation of metro districts and provide some examples that will illustrate some of what John just spoke about. I hope this quote by Margaret Mead is an inspiration for us all. Okay. Now, why should you care? Back to that. Okay, there's a lot of misconceptions about metro districts. For instance, that metro district is like an HOA. It is not, because one is a government with taxing authority and one is a private association. Also, many people believe that the developer remains in control of the board of directors until build out, like as an HOA, but that is false. As soon as a taxpayer owns property or signs a contract to buy, he's eligible to run for office. Another myth is that metro districts make housing more affordable. This depends on many things. First of all, do home builders reduce costs of lots? Do the developers reduce the costs to home builders as opposed to increasing developer profits? And what are the interest rates on bonds that their associated costs? There's been an explosion in metro districts over the past 20 years. In the early at the turn of the century, these metro districts numbered a few hundred. Today, there are almost 2,300. but they're increasing yearly by about 100. That's something I think legislators really need to take a look at. The mill levies have also included. Now you see them as high as 65 to well over 100, whereas the average school district levy is 45 to 50 mills. So you can see that citizens who live in these districts have a heavy burden of expenses. Castle Rock is a case in point. The Castle Rock local newspaper down there recently had an article, and they had this to say about the disbursement of taxes within their city. You can see the figures. Look at the $973 million in debt, 48% accrued interest. They collected $1.4 million in property taxes, but $32 million in Metro District taxes, most of which goes to paying off debt. So that money is not really helping the community. Then there was a great idea to create Metro Districts. And this was to provide critical government services in unincorporated areas such as fire protection, water, sewers, park and rec. These are services that counties do not normally provide. In the early 1900s, districts were created to provide these services. And by the 1950s, metro districts began to be formed to incorporate these needed services into one district. Then it was time for a new idea. And this is when Mission Viejo, a California company, came to town and created Highlands Ranch Metropolitan District. It was so successful, it still stands as a metro district with a population of over 100,000 people, with no city or town government, and it has a very low mill levy of 11. This success served as a springboard for developers to use metro districts within cities and towns. Also, the concept of a multiple metro district, as John was talking about, came into being, creating the master slave districts. This model is undemocratic in nature and it invites abuse. Then a whole new idea was created with I consider a need for scrutiny. It's called the Aurora Regional Improvement Tax. So in 2004, the city of Aurora came up with a new scheme with an expansion on the use of metro districts. The idea is not to only tax the metro district residents for their own improvements in their neighborhood, but to tax them on improvements outside of the jurisdiction of that metro district. This has never been tested in court and it may be illegal. All new and revised service plans are subject to this tax now out in Aurora. The tax starts off at 1.2 mils, then increases to 6 mils. Then it increases to the average of the district's mill levy in the past 10 years, which could be as high as 50 mils or more. And this tax is paid for an additional 10 years after the district has paid off its debt. That's a lot of years of debt. This one is a new one also that I'm not particularly fond of. This is another extension to the original intent of Metro District law that has affected taxpayers. The claim is that these community authority boards are used in the name of efficiency, but in reality they serve to subvert the voting authority of the inhabitants of a metro district. I think John gave you an example of that. By removing the notion of one person, one vote, developers may create these authorities in order to maintain control of a metro district indefinitely. The most notable are Sterling Ranch, Aurora Highlands, Red Rock Center, and Jeffco. And the way they do it is they set it up so they will have majority control by appointing only one representative per metro district to the CAB and appointing their own representatives in larger numbers. Or another tactic is to create metro districts that will never have houses in them and put those in place and put in place developer boards in order to outnumber the districts with people in them. So metro districts, what are they? Well, here you can read for yourselves the services that are available to be put into a metro district. Now, the thing that rubs me wrong here is, unfortunately, most service plans list all of these services in them, regardless of whether or not they will be provided by the Metro District. And this can be used as a ploy to increase debt, and the developers claim it gives them flexibility. Now, the Colorado Future Center is a 501c3 organization dedicated to informing citizens about issues that affect community economic health and quality of life in Colorado. Actually, one of our members of the League, Jeff Withers, who's online with us today, wrote it. And although Colorado is considered a small government state, I think Christina was touching on this, we rank near the bottom of all states in state tax collections and expenditures as a portion of our GDP. But unfortunately, we are number one in the number of governments per capita because of our local governments. We exceed the national average in local government spending. And so it shouldn't be surprising that our local government employees outnumber state employees by a ratio of 3 to 1. We also, we also rank number 4 in special districts behind, California, Texas, and Illinois, but they're much larger than we are. And then John touched on the standard way infrastructure is done. Buy some land, decide to build on it. Developer plans for and develops the infrastructure for the project. He sells it to a builder who in turn builds houses, or the developer becomes the builder as well. But in this state, they had a better idea of how to do that with the Metro District. So you must start with a service plan. And in new developments, which are known as dirt districts, because there's no houses in them yet, they are written by the attorneys for the developer or builder. In the case of an established neighborhood, these would be written by the residents. And this plan, it's a controlling document for the district. It has to have a description of the services planned. And as I said, a point of concern is that they always include all of them. There has to be a boundary map, a financial plan that shows lots of information like cost of project, how services to be financed, debt, mill levies, interest rates, costs, administrative and legal costs, and then general description of how the facilities to be constructed and the standards of construction. Now, and how they are compatible with the standards of the city or county within which they will be located. Now, this came to my attention, and this is why I got interested in this, is in my district, my Metro District, when I discovered that we are responsible for everything up to and including the paving of our streets, I reached out to a county commissioners asking that the county take over the paving of our streets. And the reply was that it couldn't be done as our streets were not built to code. So right there, that tells me there was a waiver or something because we were not built to code the way the rest of the county is expected. That's when I decided to educate myself about Metro districts. They also have to report on proposed intergovernmental agreements. And this, I think, is telling. No service plan shall be approved if a petition objecting to it is signed by the owners of the taxable real and personal problem is put forward. This is a relevant point in a resident-initiated service plan, but not in a dirt district, since the only people who could object are the people filing the plan. So then this plan must be heard by the city council or county commissioners with a public hearing and public notice. They have the authority to make some rules on their own, and they decide whether it's going to be approved, denied, or amended. Some jurisdictions, such as Erie and Longmont, have imposed their own standards. So in the next steps, has to be signed off by a district judge after all of the conditions are met. Now, the first condition is they have to file a petition with the district court, which must be signed by 30% or 200 of the tax-paying electors of the district, whichever is less. Therefore, if the only owner in the district is a developer, it could be one person, well, then that one person meets the requirement for voting, and can sign the petition. This to me is an indicator that it was original intent of the law for members of a neighborhood to make this decision, not a developer in a dirt district. So again, they have to include all the appropriate information for the service plan, the district, and the estimated property taxes to be collected in the first year. And the district judge reviews for legal sufficiency. This is normally a pro forma process. And then at that point, electors not wanting their property included may request an exclusion. Well, once again, developers are the ones submitting all this, so they don't want an exclusion for their property because all of it is their property. So I just wonder why this was included. Taxpayers who buy into these areas have no such say. So, moving on. Now, these are the next steps of what happens in a dirt district, a developer-owned project with no homes on it. The developer selects the board of directors, which consists of him, himself, employees, and/or relatives. You may wonder why these people qualify. It's because they can own if they want, they can have a contract to purchase taxable property as small as, let's say, a 10-foot by 10-foot piece of property, own a 5% interest and pay $1 for it. And that would make them legal to be on the board. So then an election is scheduled for the purpose of formally appointing the board members and for them to vote on the authorization of tax mail-in bonds. Here again is like what John showed you. I just wanted to show you how they, right off the bat, put in provisions to increase the maximum debt that other than what's in the service plan. So like in this case, they're saying, should this district be increased to should the debt be increased $16 million with a total repayment cost of $131 million for, I think it's for a mosquito. Yes, it's for mosquito control. Now try to imagine spending that much money on mosquito control in a 76 home district. Now this particular election had 18 bond issues on it, authorizing increases in the maximum spending limit to $192 million and a max repayment cost of over $1.5 billion. One for authorizing the organization of the Metro District and another to serve without limitation on their terms of office. In other words, no term limits. Needless to say, these figures do not reflect what was stated in the original service plan. So we're going to look at Parkside by American Legends in Larimer County that has the highest mill levy in that county. It's a neighborhood of 76 homes. You can see here the price. The board members were all developer employees until May of 2022. This neighborhood is in Loveland. So I'm going to show you the history as reconstructed by the new management company in the name of transparency to properly inform the residents of the district of their situation, and you can draw your own conclusions. So it was purchased by Arbor Capital, a developer who made their own LLC in Colorado for $985,000. The city of Loveland approved a service plan with a debt max of $5.8 million. Compare that to the other slide I just showed you. 55 mills plus, and the estimate to install infrastructure as $4.25 million, with the Metro District providing $2.66 million. Now, 7 individuals purchased options to buy a detention pond land tract to qualify as voters. These are the 7 people. They all had an affiliation with Arbor Capital. So the district court approved the Metro District, and they were up and running. Then the developer made an HOA, sold some lots, 35 lots to American Legend Homes for $4.45 million. First home was sold to a homeowner. January of 2021, sold another bunch of lots for $5.98 million. Take a look at all these numbers. Then a bond was issued to repay the developer for his infrastructure costs, $5.52 million. Now, in May of 22, 3 homeowners were elected to the five-member board, taking control from the developer board. So a new management firm was hired, and the neighborhood then was sold out by the end of 2022. So take a look at the bond debt. We have $5.5 million at 4.75% simple interest for 40 years. There's no payment schedule because these bonds are, what are they called? A certain kind of a bond that you can't predict the interest. So the forecasted interest, which we figured out ourselves, was $10.488 million. The builder's accounting firm predicted $14.9 in interest. We used the lower figure to do all this information. For a debt repayment for 76 lots, that $5.52 million took the price up to $210,632 per lot. So in summation, there's a large discrepancy between the anticipated infrastructure cost in comparison to the final infrastructure cost. The cost to the resident is high. It's 96 mils a year. Now for a fun math exercise, we can see and estimate the developer profits. Now these next slides, I'm just going to race through them. They were developed by our league president, Christina, who is a retired CPA and was a state income tax auditor. So if I were to go through them step by step, it would probably scramble your brains. But for those of you who are maybe accounting nerds, we'll have them in the presentation so you may look at them later. I'll just go through those quickly and then we'll go over the summation. So this is an analysis of the developer transactions, sale of land, then the agreement to provide infrastructure, followed by a summary of the income earned, and a summary of all the transactions, and finally, an infrastructure cost to the homeowner. I think that's the key point. The liability per lot is $210,632 to be paid at the rate of $5,266 per year for 40 years. Now, this is the summary. The builder bought 14.5 acres for $985. He donated some to open space, so he got a tax break that he could claim on his taxes. The actual cost then of the land that remained was $6,233 and $690, or $8,200 per lot. Then the lots were sold for a total of $10.53 million. The developer estimated infrastructure development to cost $4.2 million. However, the bond, of course, as I mentioned before, was for $5.52 million, with potential interest of almost $10.5 million. So the rate of return on this investment is somewhere between 909% before you calculate the tax-free interest on the bond, up to 3,473%, counting the interest return over 40 years. So what you might want to be thinking about is, was this metro district even necessary? Should we have a metro district this small? And does using a metro district to finance infrastructure make the housing more affordable? As long as the bond goes unpaid, the metro district will have to be filing paperwork, having elections, having an accountant or management company, an attorney, etc., for the next 30 to 40 years. So in conclusion, if the developer acquired the property for $985,000, sold it for over $10 million, what happened to make those lots so valuable in the meantime? So has the homeowner effectively paid for the infrastructure twice? Do you think that taxpayers should be responsible for adding to developer profit margins? My research found the ideal profit margin sweet spot is between 16 and 30% for developers. And all of the figures I've given you far outstrip that amount. Here's a comparison of the tax statement for two homes on the Laramie County website. They're 3 blocks away from each other. Not only does it show their taxes, but what their taxes pay for, which I think is a very handy thing for taxpayers to see. So here's the comparison. The non-metro district house, valued at $700,000, a little over, pays a little over 79 mils in taxes, for a total of $3,872. However, the metro district house, which is worth less, pays 175 plus mils for total taxes of $8,300. And you can see that he gives a lot more of his money. These people give a lot more of their money to the metro district than they do for the other services they receive in Laramie County. This just shows you the rate of the increase in mills from 2018 to 2023 in this neighborhood, from 70.8 up to 175.7. Now this, I put this in here so you could see, take a look at developer-owned debt in Flying Horse Ranch in Colorado Springs. I think it's important to examine the difference between developer-held debt and bond debt, which is sold on the open market. And I've taken the liberty of noting the crucial parts in the next slide. So here are the crucial parts circled. You have a senior bond, which means that one gets paid first, and for a total amount of $36.5 million. The interest over, I think it's 30 years, will be $29.7 million. On the other hand, the junior bond, the subordinate bond, which gets paid second, is owned by the developer. And that principal of the bond is $15 million, but the interest is $25.6 million. Now compare those differences here. This is a 4% bond. This one I think is 7.25% interest. Now, the developer bond, the developer controlled district board voted on this bond debt. No residents voted on this debt. And as you can see, it appears to be rather stilted in favor of the developer. It's also noteworthy that no principal is paid on the subordinate bond until the year 2030, and all that interest accumulates, and then you have to pay interest on the interest. Now, I know that some of you may have voted in favor of Senate Bill 110 this past session, thereby codifying developer debt as long as, quote, the board is required to receive a statement of a registered municipal advisor certifying that specified limits on the maximum interest rate of the debt have been met. The League of Women Voters recommended a no vote on this bill, as there is a built-in conflict of interest that should not be allowed in any case in the name of good governance. Now I'm going to give you an example of another very small metro district with less expensive homes here in Jeffco. It's just up the street from me. 72 homes. They haven't even finished building it. They've only built about 8 of these. You can see the price variation, and Meritage employees are the board members. Okay. Now this is a very small community. So here you already have this big bond at $2.39 million, 6%. They pay 77 mils, which is, 77 more mils than everybody else in Jeffco that pays 97. There, for 15 years, no principal is paid, so interest accrues, and they're paying interest on interest, and then the total repayment cost comes to $6.3 million. Now, their monthly expenses are what I think is what you need to think about. They are spending between $224 and $245 a month just to pay this mill levy. Plus, in addition to that, the builder is charging $110 a month in fees. Do you think does this appear to be affordable housing? The people making these decisions will never live here, nor have any responsibility for repayment of these bonds. And probably the worst of this is that the new buyers who moved in there probably have no idea that they live in a metro district yet. And they will be real surprised when they get their first real tax bill that includes the price of the house and not just the lot. So additional facts, they also had a taper election authorizing more debt, and the budget shows that the developer has loaned the district $2.125 million, which will result in developer debt. Now, the accounting, management, and legal services total $50,000 a year, and this is a large sum for 72 homes with no other amenities other than a dog park. And there's very little administration that I can see that they need to do. And only 144 voters, and they'd have to fill a board of 5. So in this district, a resolution was passed by the board of directors to impose fees on, but it said on the service plan with Aurora. So I thought, okay. So it's interesting to note that this property is in Jeffco, but it's talking about an agreement with Aurora. So this is an example of a boilerplate provision in the creation of service plans, which is repeated in most of them according to the legal counsel creating them. Whoever prepared this failed to change that information. The service plan in this district determined that streets will be owned and maintained by the district, just as in my neighborhood upon completion. This is a tiny little neighborhood surrounded by houses on 3 sides of another development with a different developer, and it's a different metro district. The service plan for that neighborhood of 125 homes turns the streets over to the county upon completion. They won't have to be paying for street maintenance. So each of these service plans was written by the same legal counsel. I couldn't come up for any other explanation other than that the streets maybe don't meet code in one and they do in the other, although there could be another reason. But this is an illustration of the inconsistencies of different service plans and the financial expectations and responsibilities for different homeowners. Then I'm going to move on to another topic, which is the number of local governments that we have and keep increasing. I compiled information on all of the counties in the state to determine how many governments each has and to see how many of those governments are metro districts. So I wanted to point out Weld County because it's a doozy. Weld County has 615 governments, and of those, 437 are metro districts. And of the developments that these metro districts are in, each 430 or 42 of them have 4 or more metro districts. So this is an indication that there's a master-slave situation there with one district controlling the money that the other districts pay. But once again, are this many districts needed? Another issue with metro districts are fees. Fees are another issue, and this is the posted cost of fees in Sterling Ranch, a metro district with a community authority board. And it's noteworthy to mention that this development was delayed by a district judge before approving its creation unless they could show they could provide water for a minimum of 20 years. Even in Arizona, they require 100. So, according to 2 resident directors elected to one of the metro districts with whom I spoke, some families are paying upwards of $400 to $500 per month for water. So district fees can become onerous for the residents. And consider that these fees are in addition to the 84 to 91 mills that these districts are paying each year. The fee schedule is outdated. The basic water charge before their tiered usage fees is $90. So you pay $90 a month plus, depending on how much water you use. The total cost of the listed fees is $192 to $200. Now, here's an example of what I would consider a conflict of interest. The Sterling Ranch Cab purchases water from Dominion Water and Sanitation, who in turn purchases water from the city of Aurora and the Denver Wise Partnership. The developer and overseer of Sterling Ranch is the developer of Sterling Ranch, and he sits on that board as well as the water board. So that to me is a red flag for a conflict of interest. So a summation of problems to be considered. Massive profits paid to developers on taxpayer dime. The size of metro districts. Are there too many individual governments being created? Fees charged. And then there's one last major issue I want to mention, and that's disclosure. Basically, metro districts are the unknown government. David Magoya, a Denver Post reporter, did an expose on metro districts back in 2019. He's no longer with the Post, but he did them then. Prior to that time, there hadn't really been much information except a few editorials. But since then, more and more people have become aware of metro districts, primarily because they discover they live in one. And this has resulted in a coalition of taxpayers who want to see reforms and are counting on their representatives in the assembly to do something about it. The need for informative disclosure is essential. The first some people learn of metro districts is in their closing documents. And I call that the disclosure of no return, as it is too late to stop the process because they probably either sold their house, they're no longer renting where they were living, and they have to move. So it puts potential homeowners in a pickle. Now, I've also walked neighborhoods, new neighborhoods, and have spoken with realtors and citizens who do not live in metro districts. So I've walked new neighborhoods in metro districts, and they have all, without exception, expressed that they know nothing about them and did not know they were living in one. They were told, some people were told that a metro district tax is just a property tax, which it is not. So the individuals that move into a new home generally do not discover the fact until their home is reassessed to include the value of the house and not just the lot. Now here's an example of one. I picked out an address and I went and looked to see what taxes they paid for 2022. They paid $23.96, but next year, because the value of the house has been added in, they're going to pay over $7,100. And I'm sure that they're going to be shocked. This causes sticker shock, and as David Magoya pointed out in his article, some people end up having to move because they cannot afford the cost, or in a few cases, some have lost their homes. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that developers reveal all of the costs to potential homebuyers before signing a contract. The debt of the district, the payoff plan, fees associated, monthly cost, and the monthly cost of the Metro District task for the house being bought. Also, that there's a board of directors, that this is a government, and they're eligible to run for election. Special district elections, I'll just get through this quickly. So they have elections for two reasons: to elect members to the board, or to approve bond issues and debt. They're held on the first Tuesday following the first Monday in May in odd years. And as Christina mentioned, unfortunately, they didn't consult the county commissioners or the county authorities about this, and so they cannot do the elections. And if there's not enough people who apply to run for election, then the election is canceled. How can you vote? Well, you can vote in person or you can vote by mail. Who can vote? A registered voter who lives in the district, owns taxable property, or or has a spouse who owns the taxable property, or who has a contract to purchase a little 20-foot by 20-foot piece of land for $1. How can you run for a board position? You have to self-nominate. You have to sign and have it witnessed, print, submit on time, and to the designated election official, which is a little tricky to find out sometimes. Call for nominations. Notifications are required. The designated election official must send out notifications stating where, deadline, and how regarding these elections. Unfortunately, each designated election official determines their own way of notifying voters, and it is oftentimes very difficult to access this information. How about the kinds of notifications? This is the fly in the ointment. First of all, it can be by mail. It can be in a publication such as a newsletter, an annual report, a bill. It can be posted on the official website of the local government, or it can be posted in at least 3 places within the boundaries of the area of the election of the district. Now, however, if you live in a metro district, you have one of the following is required per Senate Bill 21-262. You also must be notified by mail or email of the election. Unfortunately, legislators did not want to include all special districts in this type of notification because they thought it would be too costly. Now, in case you're wondering why you may have never known about an election in a special district, here are some examples of typical ways notices have been posted in the past. I was doing research on Arista, which is up in Westminster area along I-36, and I had found their page telling where they posted their notifications. So it said it was on a bulletin board in the parking garage. So I drove up to Arista, I went to the parking garage, I couldn't find it. So I finally found a security guard and asked him where it was, and he pointed it out. It's sitting out kind of on this plaza area in the middle of the commercial district in this neighborhood. I don't know how many residents would see this. I certainly wouldn't even bother to go up and read it. Then the second example is the way postings were done in Green Valley Ranch years ago. And if you're out riding your horse, this might be very convenient. And lastly, they post them in a small local newspapers, such as the Fort Collins, Colorado, or all these little nice local newspapers that we have. But I don't know about you. When I read those, I never look at the classifieds, so I would miss this completely. Here is an example of a transparency notice, but it's difficult to read and you have to know where to look for it. So here's a better example of how to inform electors. Here's the official transparency notice on the left, but this manager of this district, which is Parkside, the one I told you about that got new managers, he puts out a newsletter and he tells his members of the community everything through the newsletter, and he announced all about the board election, made it very easy for people to understand how, when, where, what, why, and that's the way disclosure should happen. Please note that around the state, 92% of all elections were canceled. And lastly, you can go, one of the problems has been the domination on boards by developer-affiliated candidates, as I said. Although this information is outdated, it illustrates the problem, and it shows, here, these are all developers, and on this page, you have each developer sits on between 14 and 48 Metro District boards. On the next page is the granddaddy of them all. You have one person who sat on 73 boards. Now, that's all I have. I'm sorry it was a lot of information. I hope your head's not spinning. And if you have any questions in the chat, we'll be happy to answer them.
And we have one more area to cover, and that's the legislation that was handled through the 2023 session. There were several pieces of legislation that came through. Senate Bill 23-110 passed the legislature. It was marketed as a bill for transparency in the area of special districts. There are 5 parts to that bill. This bill requires that the special district, once a year, hold a meeting that is within a 5-mile radius of the district and allows time for public comment. This bill is the equivalent of allowing the legislature to meet in Hawaii for some of its sessions. Since when does a government entity not need to allow time for public comment? Does a special district only have to allow public comment once a year under this bill? The next part of this bill allows the developer to purchase the bonds that he, as the sole resident and the governing board of the special district, has created. The developer, as the board of directors, has determined the amount to be borrowed and set the interest rate. The transparency portion of this bill was the requirement that he pay a specialist in municipal interest to certify that the interest rate is at market rate for 7 days prior to the issuance of the bond. If you like this concept, let me remind you of the fate of a CPA firm known as Arthur Anderson and a company called Enron. Why does the developer want to acquire these bonds? There's no check and balance in place that would ensure the amounts being borrowed on behalf of the future residents of the special district are actually used to construct infrastructure in the area of the special district, or that the markup is reasonable. Senate Bill 23-110 also includes a requirement that the developer, when the district is created, inform the creating authority, the city or the county, the maximum amount of the bonds and the maximum interest rate that will be charged on the bonds. The developer is already required to do this when creating the special district plan. Lastly, the bill requires that the seller of a piece of real estate in a metro district provide the new owner with the web address of the special district, provided the special district was created after 2000. House Bill 23-1090 was the opposite of Senate Bill 23-110. House Bill 23-1090 would have prohibited the developer from purchasing his own bonds. Regretfully, it died in the Senate. House Bill 23-1105 was sponsored by Representative Brianna Titone. The bill establishes task forces to study HOAs and special districts. The special district report is not due until March of 2024. The task force is presently being formed. House Bill 23-1065. Did you know that special districts and school boards are not covered by the ethic rules? Representative Tammy Story sponsored this bill, and it would have forced the Ethics Committee to review complaints filed against these type of government entities. 23-1065 sat in the Appropriations Committee until the last days of the legislative session because it had a cost associated with it of $13,000. By sending the bill to Appropriations, further action could not take place on the bill until after the long bill was approved. By the time the long bill was approved, there was an insufficient amount of time for this bill to be passed by the legislature. House Bill 23-1062 allows metropolitan districts to levy a sales tax for the purpose of building parks and recreation areas. The Department of Revenue already struggles to handle taxes for 291 jurisdictions. What's another 2,317 jurisdictions? Under 23-1023, special districts may issue contracts under $120,000 without going through a bidding process. Senate Bill 23-273 was sponsored by Senator Marchman and Representative Bosnecker. This bill forbids the inclusion of agricultural land in a blighted urban area unless the land was designated to be included prior to 2010.
Here are the links to the reference materials that were discussed during this presentation. Please feel free to pause the video and copy this information at this time. Thank you.
What are the next steps we should be taking in the area of special districts? Special districts and the awareness of their purpose is a statewide issue. The League recognizes that we need to do more research on the problems and benefits of special districts. We need a greater understanding as to the problems and what solutions might be. And of course, we need to highlight the work of the special districts in the community. We need to encourage citizen involvement in our governments, particularly special districts. To do that, we must educate the public in these areas. We encourage you to join us in our special district work. The League works on special districts at both the local league level and the state league level. On August 17th, the State Election Task Force will review a video on how to research special districts. In Jeffco, the local government group works on special districts. Meetings for both groups can be found on the LWVJeffco calendar at lwvjeffco.org. Both groups are open to members and non-members. We hope that you will join us in our journey to discovering the facts about special districts. Have you considered joining the League of Women Voters? Information regarding League can be found at our website, lwvjeffco.org, or you can join us at our kickoff meeting on Monday, August 14th at the Sheridan Hotel on Union at 4 p.m. Details, again, are found on our website, but we would love to see you there. Thank you for coming today, and we really appreciate your time.